Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Julie, product manager for Lagoped, and this is Laurent, CEO of Peftrust. We are going to introduce you our two companies, and then we will share the work that we've been doing together for the past month. So Lagoped is a French brand developing outdoor garments, mainly waterproof garments, jackets and pants, fleeces, t-shirts, active pants, sweaters, shirts. We are a very small team, and we put a lot of efforts on product development. There are two pillars at the core of our development. The first one is a European sourcing. We source the main materials in Europe, from yarn to the finished material. And also we work only with the European garment makers. One, because we like to have a close sourcing, a local sourcing close to France. And second, because we wanted to work with garment makers that share the same values and that use the same standards. And the second pillar, is about the use of recycled material. We now have our facts on arable land depletion, on drinkable water availability, and on biological diversity that can't help but motivate us to stop extracting natural resources. Lagoped wants to be a sustainable brand in a true way, and we believe that this way is only by using recycled material and not using any natural resources. So we want to produce differently, in a different way, and so we will not use any, for example, lyocell content, any organic content, or any animal, any wood. So, sorry. Yeah, we want to have a full overview of our impact, environmental impacts. Because we
you want to measure the impact of your products, maybe?
Yes, sorry. We want to make sure that we are headed to the right direction by making these claims, these allegations. And also we want to compare our products to what's on the market, and of course to share these results to the consumers. And this is when Laura and Peftrust came in.
Thank you, Julie. So indeed, Peftrust is a French startup company. We're based in Metz and in Paris. We're a team of 10 professionals, and we're doing an LCA platform for brands to measure the environmental footprint of their product, and then to share this information to the consumer, and also, of course, to improve the footprint of their products. I will use the word LCA quite a number of times in this presentation. So LCA means life cycle analysis or life cycle assessment. This is the method to calculate, to measure the environmental footprint of a product. So why are we speaking of EcoScore today? Why is it important today and not yesterday or day after tomorrow? There are actually two factors that are driving this trend. First factor is consumer demand. We are now seeing more studies concluding that this is a factor of conversion. Sustainable products sell basically faster than conventional products. And the other discovery, the other factor is the regulation, of course. We're going to come to that in a minute. So the question is not really whether we should do it, we must do it, but how to make that an opportunity. So coming to the topic of today's intervention, what's the framework, what's the legal framework in France and in Europe? So maybe a closer look to France for a start, and then we'll extend to the European perspective. So France is taking a mandatory approach, meaning that since January 1st of this year, brands have to communicate certain information about their traceability, about the traceability of certain of their operations. We can be more specific during the questions. And what's coming ahead for next year is the obligation to print an eco score, so an indication to the consumer how the product performs in terms of environmental footprint. So it's a whole debate going on at the moment in France, which method, which database, which format should be used for this information to the consumer. I've put here an example on the bottom right corner of the slide. Don't take it too literally because it's not yet decided, but this shouldn't be too far from what you see here on the screen. Oops, no, that's good. Now on the European perspective, Europe has taken a voluntary perspective. It's going to be a voluntary-based program for brands that relies on two pillars. One pillar for traceability. This is the ESPR pillar with the digital product passport. It's expected to become enforceable by 2025, something like that. And for the LCA part, for the environmental footprint part, this is the Green Claims Directive that is actually being submitted to the European Parliament next week. So it's a really hot topic at the moment, and we are very eager to see what comes out from this directive. So, giving you back the floor, Julie.
So the evaluation process happens in 3 steps. The first step is the data collection. The second step is the analysis and the calculation by Peftrust. And the last step is the analysis of the results of the LCA and the communication to consumers. So talking about the data collection, there is the biggest part of the job is to have a BOM list that is pretty much detailed. You need to list all of your components to the very last, and you need to weight the components, how big they take part in your products by weight. Then for each supply, so for each component, you need to gather information about composition, about processes for the components. Starting from yarn to the shipment of the component to your garment factory. And same goes for trims. So once you manage to gather information about the components, then you need to make a list of the textile processes that combine all these components into a garment. So by textile processes, we mean cutting, seam taping for waterproof garments, sublimation, screen print, embroidery, processes like these. And for each process, we must know whether it is done in-house in your factory or if it is outsourced. And in that case, if it is outsourced, you need to know where it is done, where is the operation done. And we also need to mention the shipment between the different factories, if there are several. Once we listed the process, the textile processes, we of course mentioned the garment factory name and location. And then all the information about the product leaving the factory. So first, the shipment method. And then you need also to know where your product is going to be shipped. Is it shipped in a warehouse? Is it shipped directly to a client or to a distributor? So you need to know where the product is going to go before going to the final consumer. And all of this information needs to be gathered, organized, and maintained. And for that, we use the PLM. And our PLM is called C-Design. It's a French brand. And using this PLM and all this data being collected, we can now pass it to Peftrust company so that they can analyze it and make the calculation.
So the way it works is that when you land on our platform, either manually or automatically, you can choose the sort of product that you're designing, then you subcategorize it, and then there's a template with an LCA engine behind that runs the calculation. It's a calculation based on 16 environmental impacts, so not only carbon footprint, but carbon, water, ecotoxicity, etc., etc. There are 16 different categories that are prescribed by the European methodology that is called the PEF. So that's the underlying method that we are using for computing these scores. Why we're using this method is because it's very important when you publish a score, when you make a claim to the consumer, it's important that this claim is comparable and standardized, so that it's not your claim, but it's a well-asserted claim, and you can communicate comfortably what you're saying to the consumer without any risk of being taxed of false allegation. And for that, two things are very important. The score, of course, the score of your product, but also the score of the score. I mean, how reliable is the score that you have published? So that's why we have organized things with another score, the score of the score, that is called the quality score. And it's an indication for brands of how robust is the score they have, the eco score they have obtained through our platform. So for example, Lagoped is very advanced in this analysis. So the scores we had with Lagoped are already at the expert level. But you don't have to be an expert to start into this trend. And you can already start and obtain an eco score if you already know your BOM, which is the case for most of brands, of course. And then from this basic level score, you can progress and use the information first internally and then progress to share this information to the consumer.
So then we get the result from Peftrust using an online application, the Peftrust app. And so for today's presentation, we used an example of our waterproof jacket, the EVE jacket. I chose the most complicated example to make sure that we see all the steps. So this is what we get on the app. We get mainly the PEF score. We have the name of the garments. We have the category of the garment, which is very important because from each category that Laurent mentioned, you have a benchmark in the category. This benchmark at the method, at the PEF score, sorry. And so the eco score is made based on the benchmark product. This is the comparison point. So the category that you choose is very important for the results for the eco score. We also get then the quality ratio, recycled content level, and the plastic microfibers reject. And then we get the full impact. So these are the 16 impact results for your product. And you can see how big each impact is in your product. So for this example, the maximum is the ecotoxicity freshwater. There are a lot of numbers of figures. These we only get in the online app, so this is only available to the brand. So the next step is to communicate to consumer, and for this part we wanted to have a different look, so that the consumer experience is not too much affected by too many figures at the same time and not easy to understand. So we chose to separate the 16 impacts into several categories. The most important one for us is the environmental impact. So climate change, land use, ecotoxicity of fresh waters, and water consumptions. And then we split it, the 16 impacts, into several categories. So this is a way to communicate the result to the consumer. It's not an easy part because you have to make sure that it is pretty understandable. But then for us, it's a good way to improve our development, to make even better and better in the development process.
With that, we thank you for your attention and be happy to answer your questions.
Yes, please.
So this is the subject that we looked at for the last couple of performance days, once again based on LCAs, but a different way of interpreting them. You now have two people who have put a lot of work into it. You can ask them the awkward questions. So we will get some online questions, and I'm going to kick off the questions. We also have questions for the audience. My main observation is that we've seen a lot of LCAs. LCAs are not an exact science. As you know, they all contain information on energy, waste and water, but I have seen some LCAs that have over 35 categories to assess, and I've seen some LCAs which only have 10 categories to assess. So if we both did an LCA with different parameters, we would get different results. Are you still going to fall foul of the problems of LCAs, is my question.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll get that one since it's on methodology. Yeah, so the thing is, LCA can be made with various methodology, and actually the EU, the European Union, has been working on one methodology since 2013, with more than 3,000 stakeholders from the industry, scientific world, experts, etc. And in December 21, they came up with a recommendation, an official recommendation from the European Commission to recommend the PEF method. So this method is currently being widely accepted within the EU, and especially and also further in the US and in the rest of the world. So it's kind of one of the leading, and for me, the leading reference method for doing LCA. So that's how it's becoming a benchmark. It's becoming a norm. And if we compute a score with this method and some others compute a score with the same method, they are consistent together and they can be compared. So that's the main security for us to ensure that we are computing comparable and consistent scores.
Thank you. I've got quite a long list of questions, so maybe you stop me when it's too much. As I understood, as comparison to other product footprint measuring methods, your tool would allow to communicate directly to the client the ratio, right? If it's A, B, C, or D.
Yeah, our platform is purely B2B, so it gives the brands the power to do it, to communicate to the consumer if they want it. We don't communicate anything to the consumer, but yes, if the brand wants to communicate the eco score based on the PEF format, yes, they can do.
Okay. You don't do any proving of the documents or of the information given, like recycling content and so on, right?
So the recycled content, yes, it is one of the information that comes out of the platform. And if I understood your question correctly, there is a question about the check of the information. Yes. So we do a check of the information. Basically, since we are assessing a lot of products, we start to have a benchmark, and sometimes we see a data coming up, and it's like 50% off the charts. So we can send an alert saying, okay, look here, this data looks suspicious. Maybe there's an error, or maybe there's something more serious, so please check it.
Okay. And you don't take into consideration like aspects of farming, neither end of use, correct?
Sorry, expected farming and?
Farming in the beginning, neither the PEF Trust would consider end of use. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Again, in this European methodology, which is open source, it's a really cradle to grave analysis. So it starts at the field and ends up at the land use. Sorry, not on the land use. At the end of life. So every step is collected from growing the fiber with the yarn, the fabric confection, the use at the consumer phase, etc., etc. So coming up to one aspect, there's a lot of data within the platform, and if brands don't have all this data, which is the case for the vast majority, we input default average data. Okay, and then all these different default average data can be replaced with specific data. The further the brand is progressing on this transparency path. So that's what the score of the score is about. If you start a calculation with very low data, very low specific data, you'll have a score, but it's an average score. And the further you go into transparency, the better is the quality of your score.
In our case, we stopped at the shipment of the product, when the product leaves the warehouse. So the end of use that you are talking about, we didn't share this information to PEF team, so they use an average score for this part, and which is why the ratio is not 100%, the quality ratio is not 100%.
And again, all these average are prescribed by the methodology. So it's not that we just guess what the consumption of electricity for one European is. It is the result of the work that has been conducted the last 10 years by the European Union.
Thank you.
On the very subject of LCAs and such like, they're looking at information which has been previously collected and not current best practice. So a two-part question before I come to you. Firstly, who's moderating the data? Is that in-house or is that a third party? And how many LCAs would you use to moderate the data? So what I'm asking about is, if we've changed an agricultural process or we've changed a dyeing process, are we going to be hooked in to something that was practiced 10 years ago, or can you deal with a more modern effect? Whilst you're answering that, we're going to go for the next question.
We manage the data.
Well, there's two sides of this of Charles' question. One side is with the brand, how often they actualize the data. And one side is in the database we use, how accurate, how updated they are. So on this side, at the moment, we're using a database that has been released 6 weeks ago. And it's very complete, very precise. It contains a lot of different materials and processes for textile industry. And it's something that has been released by the European Union. So I would say it's very updated.
And regarding the data, our industry is pushed by seasonal evolvement. In Lagoped's case, we have around 80% of same style 1 year from another. We do only maybe 20% of new style each season. So we monitor our styles each year because they don't change it. We have the same fabric, the same factories. And so if there is one change, we will know for sure. It will be it will come from us. So we will easily update our PLM system and then share the updated information to PEF team. But basically, it would be re-evaluated each season.
In the example you used, I saw an A with an underline that's saying 13%. There, the score 13%. It's under the A. It says score 13%.
Yes.
Is that the quality score you mentioned before? And is there something like a bare minimum?
No. Yes. No, here it's not the quality score. The quality score was here. Yeah. So it's actually another ratio that is used by the brand.
And what is the 13% then?
So the 13% here is the how to spell that in English? It's how far you are from the B. You are A by 13% better than B.
Okay.
Hope this is clear.
Yes. My other quote: if your data is completely based on what we call secondary data, so from the average database, will you ever get to a high score?
No. Meaning a high quality
a high
score?
quality score?
No, no. If your data is completely based on average, you'll stay at the standard
One
level.
star or something like that. So if all your data is based on a fully certified LCA with actual data, not coming from the database, you have a higher probability of getting a 3-star quality rating. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct for 3-star quality score. It doesn't have anything to do with the A, B, C, D, E. Huh?
No. I understand that.
Whilst we're going to the next question, your hand was up first. Whilst we're going to the next score, can you give us an approximate financial figure to do a single PEF? How much do you charge?
For one product or?
Correct. One PEF.
One PEF. Well, for one PEF, it's free. It's our trial offer. And even for 20 products, it's up to 20 products, it's free. So, yeah, you can just try it.
So thanks, Charles. So going back to what Charles also said, so this is not obviously science yet, and the LCA, I'm all up for LCA, so I used the Higg Index in the past. But when do you think that, and I'm really happy to see France that is also leading the way, at least for European community, but when do you see the industry, I'm not saying becoming a whole, just in terms of metrics and, what LCA, how we rate them and everything. Like, for example, take the labeling, you got a Genetex, you got a ASTM for one market. So we are still far away. So even, Higg Index was prohibited in Norway, right? So because it all always go to legislation. So different legislation, countries and everything. So how far are we, in your opinion, from, again, on a more, how to say, holistic approach, and then, where there would be some, proper standard across basically the globe? So.
J'y vais sur la méthode, la réglementation. Yeah, it's true, we're quite far ahead still, and I think it's going to take a few years again for having a standardized everywhere information in Europe actually. But what I'm seeing from our perspectives is that many brands are going now not because they want to publish that to the consumer, but because they already want to know where they are.
Sure.
Since we're in the past we were taking decisions on eco design, for example, with just the intuition.
Yep.
And today we have a standardized measure to actually say if we are in the right direction by how much, or if we're in the wrong direction by how much. So I agree with you, but labeling to the consumer is by far not the only driver today.
Hi, I have 3 questions, if that's possible. So first of all, since we've been talking about the quality of the data and the quality score, which impact or relevance has the quality score for the communication in front of the end consumer? Because it would still be an A, a B, or a C, but the A of a low quality score may be easier to achieve, or that's something you have just said, that it's easier, that it might be easier to achieve. So what is your thoughts on that?
I don't think we are able to get an A if we have just 1-star quality ratio.
Well, it's a very interesting point, because this is the question being actually addressed at the moment by the legislation in France, and will be tomorrow meeting the Minister of France for Environment, and that's one of the topic for discussion. Maybe what I can share is that what we'd like to propose is that you are allowed to make a public assessment, a public claim, only if you are at the advanced level, and everything below must be used internally and not outside. Today, it's purely voluntary, so brands who would want to communicate based on a standard level score, they can do it, but the risk is pretty high, because whenever you do that, you will have questions from your consumers, and they will ask, how did you compute that? And if the answer is, well, it's based on generic data, then the effect is not that nice.
Then my second question is linking to materials used. So what we know, what we have learned from the HIG MSI is that we cannot compare materials from different categories to each other, like cellulosics to synthetics and so on, because they have different impact areas. How do you deal with that in this tool? How can it still provide a comparability, because materials is a part of the product?
Yeah, you're right. Material is very important, as Julie shown here. Yeah, here. You see that 95% of the impact of the footprint is made by materials and process. So materials are really key. The beauty with this PEF database and method is that different materials are comparable. That's the thing. When you start reasoning in 16 dimensions, you apprehend globally the footprint of the materials and the processes. So it's like putting a cost, it's like putting euros on a material, except it's not euros, it's points of environmental impact. So you can really compare different things, and yeah, different materials, different processes, different products, without being biased.
So it's because it has these 16 areas, it's more precise. That's your point, right?
That's the point, and also because the database behind this is very, very solid. It's taken 5 years to a high number of experts to put together. So that's why it's important. You know, when you make a measurement, you need two things. You need a common database and a common methodology. And if you have those two, then you have consistent and comparable scores.
Okay, then my last question. Thank you very much. But that's good opportunity. I hope it's not too silly, but I'm wondering where do these categories come from? How do you who rates, or how should I say it? Is there like a limit value for a product ending up in category E or in category D? So do you understand my question? Which requirements or which values are linked to the different categories?
Yeah, again, methodology.
You mean to choose the category of the product?
Yeah, what is it compared with?
Yeah, so again, that's the methodology, the EU methodology that prescribes 13 categories, 13 different categories, 3 for footwear and 10 for apparel. So your product will end up into one of these categories. and then we can subdivide it in subcategories and in subcategories. So that's for where your product is going to end up. And then for each of these subcategories, there is a reference product. So if we're talking about trousers, there's a standard jeans, for example. And this standard jeans is also prescribed by the method. And today, to take a silly example, a standard jeans will be 70% cotton plus 13% elastan, etc. So that's the product your product is compared to.
So the product is in a category because of its composition and because of its weight and because of its construction?
Yeah.
For those of you who aren't picking up, if you are not into LCAs and footprints, this could seem like a different science subject. We have people in this audience who are fighting their way through at the moment. This legislation is incoming. We all have to take a grasp of it. If it means nothing now, it's really going to shock you when you look into it. This is why I'm so grateful for Julie and Laurent for starting to go into detail, but you can tell there are a few people in the audience who are asking slightly more advanced questions. If you feel it's above your head, don't worry, bring us back down to earth. But I'm going to go for the next question down here.
So if this is going to be mandatory, then surely the EU are going to provide a platform that small brands as well as big brands can access, because like where do we start if we don't have this technology?
Well, we believe that there will be a reference database, so that each brand can connect and can figure out which category we are talking about, which material we are talking about. So we hopefully will get some help from this.
And also, at least it's the case in France, there is in France a tool that is free. It's publicly maintained by the state. So it gives you a very basic idea of your score, basically a standard level. And then when you want to refine it, then there are private service providers just like ourselves or other firms.
Yep. Hello, over here. Is there a plan to introduce more categories for textile products that are not footwear or apparel?
Yes, there is. Actually, can you specify what kind of products you have in mind?
Tents.
Tents, yeah. So that's a very good question. I'm thinking, what am I allowed to share publicly? But there is, as we speak, an initiative of several outdoor brands for setting up a referential for outdoor products, and we are actually in the process of defining the scope. So we'll see this afternoon if tents will be in the scope, but that's the idea, yeah.
And sorry, this is me again. So when we talk about like apparel category, for instance, usually, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a main material that is measured. You got a secondary, a third. What about like I don't know, constructed items? I'm thinking outdoor, where you have maybe like at least 2 main fabrics, and then you got like 4 or 5 plastic trims of any kind, or metal rivets, let's say even for denim, the thread, for instance. So would it be every team measure, obviously with their own weight? So let's say main fabric 60%, 40 the secondary, or let's say 30, and then goes down until basically a very minimum, like even thread, for instance?
Thread is included in the calculation, definitely. When we list the BOM lists, we don't give a percentage, but we give a weight for each component, even the lightest ones. We take the weight of the final product. We know how much the main fabric, second fabric take part in, and then we assess for the little parts, because we don't have precise balance, you know.
I'm still looking for questions, because if I still have more questions myself. That publicly available database start point, is that the environmental impact assessment in France? That database?
No,
the one that says one sheep is as bad as one cow. And the rest of the world say 6 sheep are as bad as one cow. I mean, we always highlight the big discrepancy thing, but I work in wool.
You know, the only database I'm referring to is this EF 3.1. That's the latest version of the European endorsed database.
Brilliant. I'm still looking for questions, and we still have more questions. This is what I said. It's an interesting subject. I'm coming to you next.
You mentioned that if your quality score is low at just bomb level, that as far as I understand it with Loi AGEC, is that it is your requirement to publish data for end consumers. So if the decision is made that you're only at the standard level, and you're saying that you may have the option to not publish because you're only at standard level, how does that, will Loi AGEC change then their regulation on what you should publish? Is there going to be a legislational change there?
So there's no definite answer yet, since the regulation is being written as we speak. But for Loi AGEC, you only need to communicate on the first 3 tiers, and you only need the made-in for the traceability. So if you don't have much information, but just that one, that's enough to comply with the AGEC. And then for the EcoScore regulation, then we'll see. It's probably going to be a voluntary-based approach for next year in France, and after next year, it's going to be mandatory. And in the 18 months that we have from now to the mandatory phase, the decree, the governmental decree, will precise the modalities.
Hi, I actually have 2 distinct questions, if I may. First one is, I'm missing actually in the entire presentation any mentioning of any product certifications or material certifications. Do they really do not play any part in the whole PEF system? And the second question I have is, there's so many new advanced materials coming to market. And you mentioned that, you know, the database is EF 3.1. Is there really a tracking and regular updating, like a really regular updating of these advanced materials coming into this database, so that you can really compare all these different fabrics that are coming to market, or products coming to market? Because the BOM has, I don't know, 75% of the total impact of a product, as you showed it.
Yeah, I forgot the first question.
Certification, sorry. Certification, product certification.
So certifications. Certifications are accounted for in our platform. It's a measure of how reliable your data is, but it's not always accounted for in the database. So it's a bit, it depends which material we are talking about, actually. So certain are, certain others are not. And the second question, I forgot it again. Sorry, I'm
sorry. I should have asked these separately. I'm really sorry. Second one is the database, EF 3.1, advanced new materials coming.
So no, of course, very recent materials won't be in the database, but there is a strong push from material producers at the moment to have their materials referenced into the database. Since these initiatives are spreading, we are actually in discussion with certain of them to see how we can speed up that process. And also, since you are quite technical in these matters, the EU authorizes, let's say, a respiration clause. You can use 95% of EF 3.1 database plus 5% of privately given data. For example, if a manufacturer has a very precise material, he's done an LCA very rigorous on this material, then we are allowed to use and still remain certified.
Can I actually point out that Lauren and Julie are doing remarkably well because you're giving them hard questions. And actually, I want to remark on the audience, if we'd had this session last year, the questions would not have been so high level. So generally, I'm chuffed of the level of comprehension of the awkwardness about what you're talking about. I have a final virtual question, and then we're doing one live. After that, I'm going to move them off the stage to the side so you can speak to them privately because we need to get ready for the next panel. Now, the virtual question is, usually in the bill of materials for waterproof fabric, there are not percentages of PU or PTFE of membranes or coatings. How would you evaluate this impact? So we're talking about when we do not know the percentage of the composition of the substrate. We just know that there is a certain amount of PTFE or other materials.
En fait, quand tu as 3 couches, par exemple, un tissu 3 couches, et que tu ne sais pas combien font chacune des 3 couches. Tu sais juste que c'est un polyester, une membrane en PU.
You can tell these are quite advanced questions because we've tripped up on these before, and it's a learning.
In that case, we would lower the ratio quality and use an average score.
Thank you. Sorry, last question. Very simple. I work mainly in the North American market since you are obviously in France, and we all need to be up to date with this LCA argument. So if I read correctly, the mandatory, basically, France regulation will be only for brands within a certain business, right? So that means in a certain either volume of production or, I mean, dollars turnover. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
And then right after there will be a second phase where every brand, even the smallest brand, has to be mandatory. It's not known yet.
Well, it's not known yet. What is known is for the AGEC law. You understood that AGEC law is there, and climate and resilience is there, and DPP is there. Yep. So for AGEC law, what is happening? It's happening in 3 phases. Year 1, it's brands with more than 50 million euro turnover and more than 10,000 units per model. Then second year, it's more than 25 million euro turnover, and third year, more than 10, I think. So the very small brand, I think, will not be affected for a while.
Yep.
But medium and large, yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Charles.
Can I ask us as an audience to show appreciation for Julie and Lauren again? Can I ask you guys to put your email addresses on the board for those people who want to put up follow-up questions, and then I will move them off the stage so that if you need to speak to them on a one-to-one basis. Coming up next, we have a panel hosted by Sophie Bramall, who is the technical editor at World Sports Activewear, on man-made regenerated cellulosics. So thank you for engaging, and that's the hardest set of questions we've challenged anyone with so far at this show. We will be back in about 10 minutes with this panel to kick off.